NFL injuries. If you're like me, it's a great time to be a Chiefs fan. I love football. I love NFL football. And we got to think about the other side of this game. And every time that a player goes down, clutching their knee or their ankle or some other part, right? We all hold our breath to just see, are they going to get up, or is this going to be a really serious injury? Is it just a sprain, or is it the end of their season? Maybe even their career. These NFL players suffer career ending injuries pretty frequently. And so it's always a scary moment, especially when it's your team and you're seeing players that you admire and obviously have an interest in go down. Again, very scary. Again, as a Chiefs fan, obviously everybody gasps anytime Patrick Mahomes goes down. He's had a lot of ankle injuries and has amazingly always been able to come back fairly quickly. He had the knee injury several years ago, which sidelined him for a little bit. So anyway, one thing you might remember back, Dak Prescott's gruesome ankle injury a few years ago, and the stadium went silent. The fans were stunned. Just imagine that your job was that dangerous. And one bad step, your paycheck, maybe your career, your health are on the line. And that's the reality for NFL players. At the end of all of it, we have to remember these are people, real injuries, and real jobs. And we don't always necessarily put all that together in the moment of a game, but that's exactly what we're looking at. So today we'll talk about recent injuries. Just as you probably know, this week Tyreek Hill had a devastating knee injury. There's talk about clearly he's out for the rest of the season. Is this a career-ending injury? Only time will tell. But it was another one, just gruesome to see. And we're going to break this down, how the NFL handles player health, the legal side of it. Obviously, that's where we come in on this podcast: workers' comp, lawsuits, contracts, and what rights players really have. Just in this young 2025 season, we've seen Tyreek Hill go down with a dislocated knee and torn ligaments, again, season ending. Malik Neighbors of the Giants, he's a rookie star. He tore his ACL and he's out for the season. Brian O'Neill, who's a Vikings offensive tackle, suffered an MCL sprain, out for at least a while. CeeDee Lamb, a very notable Dallas Cowboys wide receiver, suffered an ankle injury. Nick Bosa, again, a notable 49ers defensive end, suffered a knee injury. Joe Alt, who's a Chargers offensive tackle, suffered an ankle injury. And Alex Highsmith, who's a Steelers linebacker, sustained a high ankle sprain. Again, those are some of the notable ones that we've seen just in this beginning 2025 season. When Tyreek Hill went down here this week, cameras caught the teammates' hands on their helmets because they knew it wasn't just another ankle tweak. This was a big injury, a season-ending injury, and again, potentially a career-changing moment. It's not just a handful of stars every week. ESPN's injury tracker lists dozens of players that are sidelined with some kind of an injury, and injuries are the norm in professional football. They're not the exception. Now, recently, there's been a lot more lower body injuries, especially knee injuries, torn ACLs, and there still continues to be a debate on turf versus natural grass. And it does seem like a lot of injuries occur on artificial turf, but yet it's still utilized by stadiums throughout the NFL. And again, this is a very hotly debated issue. So is this just part of the game, or is this a systemic problem that should be fixed? So why do NFL injuries matter legally? Okay, so injuries happen, but here's where it gets interesting. It's the legal side. There's three frameworks that cover NFL players and their injuries. Workers' compensation, like any employee, the players may qualify for workers' compensation. Personal injury tort law, again, potential negligence, defective fields, equipment, unsafe care could all play into some type of claim that an NFL player may have. And then finally, there's contracts and there's waivers, arbitration, there's limits on lawsuits. So there's a whole legal framework around these players, their health, and injuries that they sustain. So think about this. If you slipped on your job, you had some kind of an incident at a factory, say for example, you'd expect to be covered by workers' compensation. So why shouldn't the NFL players get the same when their job site is a football field? Now, another issue that has been progressing in the public awareness is the fact that multiple concussions sustained by players over the course of a career can lead to significant brain damage in these players, which later on in life materialize into very debilitating conditions. And a lot of times they've led to player suicides or just shortened lifespans, things like that. And there was an NFL concussion settlement. There were billions that were paid out. And that proved that the league can be held accountable for their players' health. Again, the NFL makes a lot of money and they make it through those players. And so the question is always going to be there. Is the NFL doing enough to protect its players? And again, with the concussion, we've seen this growing awareness. We've seen concussion protocols in place. They're trying to pull players off the field if they recognize that a concussion potentially occurred. Again, we've seen the guardian caps utilized for players that may have had a concussion or are at risk for something. And the guardian cap is the overlay onto the helmet that it looks a little silly. The player kind of stands out with a much larger helmet than the others. And matter of fact, this week there was I believe it was a Green Bay Packers player, Dobbs, that was wearing one. And I saw memes come out because, again, it was pretty notable that his helmet was larger than others. But again, that's something that the league is implementing as an effort to try to prevent brain damage in these players. So it's a really serious situation. And at this point, again, based on legal proceedings, the NFL is treating it as the serious condition that it is. Okay, let's break down workers' compensation in the NFL. Do players qualify? Yes, but with complications. Obviously, the NFL is a multi state organization. You've got teams in many different states. So it's going to fall under different states' jurisdictions. And then questions arise about what state law applies, things like that. So it's not always just a straightforward what work comp this player is covered under. Now, some states have specific exclusions in their work comp laws for professional athletes. And so, again, it's not always cut and dried that a player in the NFL is going to be covered by work comp. And interestingly enough, California once was a hub for player filings under work comp until California restructured its laws. And then that largely went away. In California, there was a player that only played one game there, and he was able to file years later for benefits under California law. And that just points out some of the quirkiness that goes or surrounds NFL players and the work comp system. But benefits can include medical care, rehab, wage replacement, and disability if it comes to that. But there's limitations, there's caps on the benefits that are allowed to players. Sometimes there's waivers in their contracts. Sometimes the contracts have arbitration provisions, which just basically means any disputes have to be arbitrated. And finally, and by the way, I've talked about arbitration in the past. And as a matter of fact, if you want to learn more about that, you can go to this video here. And then there's latency issues with the brain injuries. Again, you get down the road several decades and you're having these problems, and trying to reconnect it to your NFL days can be very difficult. Can you imagine a situation where, say, a warehouse worker needing 3 lawyers just to figure out where to file their injury claim? That's the kind of situation that a lot of NFL players face because, again, because of the multi-state nature of the NFL, just nothing is cut and dried. And then again, there's contractual provisions that come into play that make it very difficult for these NFL players to seek the benefits that they should be getting. So now let's look at the different side of it. Instead of, say, workers' compensation, let's look at personal injury and tort claims. And again, I always say tort is basically the legal term for a personal injury type claim. It's not a breakfast food. And with a tort claim, a personal injury claim, the person that's injured has to prove fault, has to prove negligence on somebody. So hypotheticals might be raised turf. Say there's a raised turf seam or something wrong with the field, and that causes an ACL tear. You'd have to prove there was negligence by the stadium. Maybe there's a faulty helmet. And so now you're talking about a defective product claim against the manufacturer of the helmet. Or what if player goes in, has a medical procedure, it's botched, it doesn't go well, whatever that looks like, it ends their career. Well, now there's a potential medical malpractice claim involved. So, if Hill's injury, for example, Tyreek Hill, if his injury was worsened by turf conditions or, say, a medical delay or something like that, the question arises, could he or the players union pursue claims beyond the team's insurance? And that is a question that's out there. So again, there's always going to be, when you're in this arena, you're having to prove fault, things like that. There's also going to be questions about assumption of risk. And what does that mean? That means the idea that the person that was engaging in the activity participated in the activity knowing the risks that were involved. And that can be weighed against any negligence being claimed against some other party. The idea is players accept risk of hard hits, but again, do they accept the risk of unsafe facilities or equipment? So again, with the concussion lawsuits, that kind of showed systemic negligence that opened the door to a class action by many NFL players where they actually sued the NFL. So putting this into practice, the idea of work comp versus PI, personal injury, what does that look like? Workers' comp is like fast food. It's quick, but it's limited. And we always tell our clients that. I essentially tell people calling in with a work injury, the work comp system is not great. Our job is to maximize a not great system for our clients. And the remedies available, compensation available through work comp pales in comparison to what you might be able to recover in a personal injury claim if you have a claim against someone else, because work comp is set up by lawmakers. It's put in place to provide benefits, but also to limit the employee from what they can recover. And so Personal injury, on the other hand, so not like fast food, more like steak dinner. Again, it's much better on the recovery side, but it is harder because now you are having to prove somebody did something wrong. Somebody did something negligent. So work comp, again, no fault. Usually it's faster, not always. Again, insurance companies are involved. Sometimes they make it hard. And again, work comp just has limited payouts on the whole compensation side of things. But personal injury, again, it's fault based. It's risky because you could walk away with nothing, but you could potentially end up with very significant compensation depending on the nature and extent of the injuries and the damages that flow from those injuries. And again, the concussion class action lawsuit, it paid out billions to multiple players. And that just shows you what the potential can be in the personal injury side of things. So if you were a player, would you want to take the sure thing with limits or gamble for a potentially huge payout? And that's the question they're going to often face, depending on the severity and extent of an injury. So here's the thing, just like injuries in professional sports, there's going to be specific things you have to watch out for if you are injured, and things are going to need to be documented. Again, these players are going to need to know their contractual rights. If you're somebody that's injured in your job, obviously you're going to want to know what your rights are and understand the system, things like that. Again, you got to understand the difference between a short term injury and a lifelong injury. And again, that's what these players face. And as always, I say there's absolutely no reason not to reach out to a lawyer if you're hurt, if you're hurt at work, or if you're hurt by somebody else. It's a no obligation call. It's free. It costs you nothing. And you can learn more about what all your options are. And again, these NFL players, they have lawyers and they're going to be seeking the best avenue of recovery for themselves when they're hurt. And you should do the same thing. Just like recently, CD Lamb, the Dallas Cowboys wide receiver, a player with an ankle sprain, rushing back without proper documentation, future degeneration of his ankle could be ignored. That could limit his claim. And same goes for you. You've got to make sure you're fully investigating, you're getting your injury documented, you're being seen by the appropriate medical people, because again, you never know when an injury could be a lifelong problem. And you got to ask yourself the question, would you let the same organization that profits from your body also control all the medical records about that body? Again, when you're dealing with a work comp claim and you've got a work comp insurance company involved, they're directing the medical care. They're the ones that are in charge. And are you going to simply rely on them to have your best interest at heart? Or are they going to be working to get you off the work comp and back to work for the employer? As we go away from this episode, one thing that will be interesting to see is, again, whether discussions start happening about the dangers of artificial turf. And again, if, the Tyreek Hill incident is shown to have been caused, even at least in part, by a turf issue. And again, there are several others in this season's injury list that very possibly had turf involvement as opposed to natural grass. The question is, if more evidence piles up about the dangers of turf, if the discussion heats up, could we see the next concussion style lawsuit against the NFL for the injuries that players are sustaining from this artificial turf? It'll be interesting to see. So keep this in mind. NFL injuries aren't just statistics, right? They trigger legal battles over rights, pay, and health. And again, these players, next time that ESPN ticker roll an injury report, just remember these are real people, right? This isn't just fantasy football league. This isn't a video game. Real people getting hurt. And that's just like in our world. Every day I'm interacting with real people getting hurt. And that's a person whose legal and financial future may be hanging in the balance. And when you see those players, you have to think about yourself as well. Because when you're hurt at work or you're hurt in some other fashion, that's exactly where you find yourself. Your future could be hanging in the balance. So, again, as always, feel free to call, no obligation. It's a free call, and we can take a look, see how we can help, investigate. We're here. And until next time, please be safe and be well.